Hello everybody, my name is Zen, and it has been a long time since we've done a Minecraft video on this channel. Not to, count the Minecraft Dungeons one, because that's, in my opinion, that's quite different, but a proper Minecraft video. It's not that I fell out of love with the game or anything, it's just that I went a different way as far as my interests are concerned. However, over the last year, I have been playing quite a bit of Minecraft. I'm recently married. I now have a family, and I've been playing Minecraft with the kids, and it has been a lot of fun. But there's been something really exciting that has happened as of today, which is April the 16th, 2020, and that is that the Minecraft Nvidia RTX Beta is available on PC, and what you're seeing in the background is the result of that. What is RTX? What is ray tracing? What is this light thing that you're seeing in the background? We'll explain all that. I'm going to break down ray tracing in a pretty easy manner, just so most people understand it, and the reasons why you have to have a PC currently in order to even utilize it, and all of that nonsense. In general, though, I'm going to try to keep it very simple so ray tracing can be observed in an easy fashion for most people who don't know what the heck ray tracing means or what it is or the technology behind that. We're going to break it down. So at its very core, ray tracing is a digital technology for simulating light and trying to simulate it in a realistic fashion. So if we break it down to its basics, think about light as you would see it outside. Imagine looking out your window, because everybody's stuck inside right now with the global situation. Imagine looking at your window and the sun is beating down on the ground, and you've got grass and you've got rocks and you've got a tree, or maybe you live in the city and you've got concrete and stuff like that all around you, and windows and reflective material. Everything that the sun hits, everything that the light is hitting, is then reflecting off of those objects. Light reflects off of rocks, it reflects off of trees and leaves, and basically almost any object that the light actually hits. In a realistic setting, the light is bouncing off of and illuminating the areas around it. There's a thing called subsurface scattering, which this relates to, but we're not going to get into it. If you're interested in learning more about what subsurface scattering is, I would suggest going and looking at the Wikipedia for that. We're, however, not going to get into that. So light bounces off of other objects and then illuminates the things around it. And if you try to imagine this, you can see a direct path, right? You see the ray of light going from the light source all the way down to the rock, which is then bouncing off of the rock onto different objects nearby, which are then scattering to more and more objects. But where does your eye come into this? At what point does your eye get the light that is bouncing into it? Eventually, these, different refractions of light bouncing off of everything do make their way to your eye. And that is how we perceive light. That is how we see, right? That's just how our retinas work. So with that in mind, that is totally not how graphic rendering has worked over the last while. Like over the last several years, this is not how this system has worked in graphical rendering as far as rendering light, because it just is too much to try to compute. It is too much for the computers to try to work through. There's computational issues with the power of the hardware that we have, and it can't keep up with figuring out all of these dynamics. But that has recently changed with, upgrades to new hardware. And on top of that, just the ray tracing technology. Again, we'll get that in a second. So what has happened in general for the last, decade or more, as far as 3D rendering is concerned, is you imagine that light source, the sun, beating down its light, but then you stop there. You don't really ever have any extra shadowing or any extra subsurface scattering or any type of light then bouncing off of those objects. So it is really basic in the way that it looks, and artists and level designers and all of that stuff have done a very good job of making games look really good over the years using this technique. However, it is very outdated, and RTX claims that they can try to fix that. So what ray tracing does, what the ray tracing technology does, and specifically RTX is real-time ray tracing is basically what it stands for. So what real-time ray tracing does is it seeks to take that path of the light going from the sun, bouncing off the rocks, and then bouncing off other objects nearby, and eventually reaching your eye, and it draws the path backwards. So it goes, okay, what can the player see in this scene? Imagine you're playing Minecraft, you're in a first person view. So imagine your character's eyes, or in this case, we'll call it the camera. What can the camera see? So it draws the path backwards. It says it can see this rock. It can see this piece of dirt. It can see this tree. So what is the light then bouncing from? Not to, right? Because it's drawing it backwards. What is it bouncing from? Okay, well, it is bouncing off of the water nearby, and then that is, then eventually passed all the way back to the light source. The way that this works is, in order to have it not take a lot of power, a lot of technology to even run, it basically is drawing very few lines, as few as possible. And those lines are simulated in a scattered way. And if you were to look at just how the rays were being drawn in the scene, it would look like very staticky. But then the graphics card is applying essentially almost like a blur effect. It is using hardware and AI learning to then take all of that like grainy effect and smooth it out and make it actually look like it would a realistic scene. But in general, it's not actually creating, millions of rays of light and simulating those. It's only creating a small handful of them and then, creating some kind of simulation based on that. So that is the way that Nvidia is getting away with doing ray tracing without it creating a situation that they need a bunch of technology, really expensive hardware to run in real time. What does that mean for you and me as people who play games? That means that we are going to get realistic lighting in video games rendering at real time instead of having to, do a pre-rendered cinematic or something like that. We're now getting this kind of lighting in real time, and this means that reflections actually look a lot better in ray tracing, because traditionally in old, graphical rendering, if you were going to do a reflection, you're essentially taking the texture of whatever you're trying to reflect and you're bending it around an object. So you're not actually ever really reflecting, and this can break people's minds in traditional graphic rendering. You're not actually reflecting anything. Like if you look at, a thing of water and the stuff is reflecting off of it, you're just taking those textures and bending them on that surface. And in this case, using ray tracing, you can actually render what a realistic reflection would look like, because you're using those bouncing of lights and where the camera is to simulate that kind of stuff. Most importantly, when it comes down to the power, like the power behind this, the computational effects that your graphics card is having to go through, it's not actually rendering anything outside of what your viewport is, what your camera is seeing. It's not simulating the light outside of what your camera is seeing. So, that's how you get the ability to do it in real time. And that is how you get the ability for it to look really, really good. And also, again, as I said earlier, it's doing very few as it can, renders or simulations of those light, pathwards going back to the light source in order to then smooth it out afterwards and make it look realistic. Again, reducing the power requirements that would be required in such a simulation. So that is as much as I can make it, a basic interpretation of ray tracing and RTX, which is real-time ray tracing. So with that in mind, why can't people who are running a PlayStation 4 and an Xbox One use this? Simply, you would think that, I have a graphic I have a graphics chip in my Xbox or my PlayStation or my phone even. Why can't they be able to use this? And the simple reason is that the new generation of graphics cards from Nvidia, so the 20 series, like the 2070. So for me, I'm running a 2070 Super, and you can see that on the top there. In fact, you can see all the stats because it's the beta and they give you all that kind of stuff. So I'm running a 2070 Super, and any RTX card, so the 20 series and higher, whatever they come out with next, has specifically on its graphical chip a piece of the chip that is primarily there just to render ray tracing. It is there to only do ray tracing when you're playing a game, and then it has its own, other part of the chip that is doing the normal graphical stuff, and then it also has, another part of the chip that is able to do things like shadow play, so it could record your gameplay. That stuff has been in NVIDIA cards for several generations now, but the little part of your chip that is actually doing ray tracing is the first new addition to the RTX cards instead of the GTX cards, which were the ones in the past. Simply put, your Xbox, your PlayStation, your old graphics cards, and your computer do not have the pieces on the GPU, the graphic processing unit, to actually render ray tracing and not have it affect everything else that is going on. So now that we've explained all of that within about 10 minutes, it was going to take a while. Ray tracing is a complicated and honestly confusing kind of technology. Let's talk about what that means for Minecraft, because NVIDIA has essentially stepped in where essentially the developers have pulled out. Because if you remember correctly, there was an announcement several years ago about the super duper graphical pack that was supposed to come to Minecraft, but that got canceled. It ended up never coming out, and it was delayed for so long, and then they were just like, okay, we're just going to cancel this. And instead, the NVIDIA developers decided that they wanted to take their technology that they've been using in other games like Battlefield or Battlefront also, and many other new AAA titles, and try to implement that into Minecraft. And that is that is an interesting decision based on how Minecraft looks. But, shaders and stuff like that are not new to Minecraft. If you go to the Java version, you can go and download shaders. A lot of them are pretty janky and only work so well, but with official NVIDIA support and with ray tracing support, it looks freaking phenomenal. Their shaders do. It doesn't necessarily come natural to the game. You have to rebuild your textures, your dirt textures and your ore textures and stuff like that to accommodate ray tracing, because it has to be able to figure out how light bounces off of that. Normal AAA games that are in 3D, let's talk Battlefield, for example, a 3D object that is rendered or that is developed for those games already has this kind of stuff simulated on it, just because they're trying to simulate light in general. And RTX ray tracing is able to use that information without them having to redo the textures and whatnot. But an old game like Minecraft doesn't necessarily consider that. So if you have a texture pack in the game and you want to use it with RTX when it comes out, you're going to have to wait for that texture artist to go through and redo the maps on their textures in order to accommodate for light. However, this means some really, really cool things. It means that things like diamonds or glowstone can look really freaking good, because they're going to have to custom go in there and figure out how it's going to work. Imagine a glowstone texture that has iron around it to make it kind of look more like a lantern. Well, if the texture artist goes in there, they can set, different lighting maps on their thing essentially, and be able to figure out how will that light that is coming from that block pass through those bars or not. And then that will be able to be rendered by the renderer, and it would look really freaking good in the game. And if you have an RTX card, if you have a 20 series card, or in the future if you have something even better than that, then you're going to be able to jump in on your computer and experience RTX and have it turned on or off by default. But if you're running an Xbox One or a PlayStation 4, you're planning on the console in general, you're going to have to wait for the next generation of consoles, which do promise ray tracing support, but we'll just have to kind of see how that ends up working out, because this is an official Nvidia RTX tech that they're using. I don't know how easy it's going to be for the Minecraft developers to transfer that over to, whatever tech that, say, PlayStation is going to be using for ray tracing, and their tech and the way that they handle ray tracing may be very different to Nvidia. So we'll have to see how that ends up working out. But for the most part, if you own an RTX card, you can use ray tracing in Minecraft. The result is a really gorgeous game, as you've seen in the background. But in the beta right now, you can only go to specific maps that have it enabled and go and play around on those maps. And they've let creators, before the launch of the beta, get in there, create some really cool maps for you to look at and to showcase how ray tracing can work within Minecraft. So you're not able to just like go in and play on your own. However, there is one of the maps that is a little less restricted, a little less, created. And it has an area where you could just kind of go out and play regular Minecraft, even though there's like a giant castle and dragons and stuff like off in the distance. So you can go and do that. And that's what I did. So in the background, you're seeing basic gameplay, like how would Minecraft look in a normal setting with ray tracing. And honestly, it is really cool. It looks really good. And it's essentially a significant improvement over normal Minecraft, and I do prefer it. It doesn't come without its issues, though. Like, for instance, the first thing I should mention is that I have a rather nice monitor that has really good blacks, and when I'm playing a game that has any kind of darkness on it, it makes it actually really hard to see, and I usually have to crank the brightness up a little bit more than I normally would on a normal monitor because the black is like really dark and I cannot see past that. Well, ray tracing does not help that at all because it does really turn down the brightness of the game in dark areas, as it should, right? It's realistically rendering lighting in a way that is going to naturally make things a little bit more dark. This means that two issues happen. One, the game suddenly becomes way more creepy if you're playing by yourself, because if you're in a cave, it's dark. It's really dark and it's creepy, and putting a torch down isn't going to immediately illuminate an entire area. It's going to do a little tiny spot. So if you switch between using ray tracing and not, it's night and day, literally, in some cases where suddenly you just have light everywhere with it off, and then you turn it on, you're like, ooh, I need to add like 50 more torches to this area than what I needed previously. Whether or not they can kind of adjust that, and you can adjust your brightness settings in the game, which does help. So I've had to crank mine up quite a bit. I don't know if that's going to come across on your guys' monitors or not. We'll see. But for the most part, mine had to be turned up quite a bit for me to even generally see into caves and whatnot. So that is a downside. The game becomes a lot darker, which means that you have to use a lot more resources in general play, like if you're just going to go play normal survival Minecraft. You're going to need a lot more torches and stuff in order to even see. The upside to this is that at night, if you're trying to build like a cool world and you're trying to set up really cool lighting, the game looks incredible in these night situations, and I freaking love it. I cannot recommend it more. Like, even if you're in a cave and you're looking at lava, for example, the lava looks great. Imagine lava, pouring off of a lava fountain or something like that. The lighting is going to be really, really cool, and mod makers are going to be able to come up with really cool ways of illuminating things, and I like that a lot. Performance-wise, it's hard to say how this is going to pan out. Like normal Minecraft runs quite well, as you can imagine, on my really crazy PC. I have recently upgraded it, and it's a monster. But with Minecraft with RTX, I've gotten a little bit of conflicting results. There are a couple maps that I've joined that are their RTX ones where the frame rate sits around 40 and jumps up to 60 when I'm not outside. And that is kind of concerning because on other maps, I will join in and it will just be running at a solid 60, even with RTX on, at rendering the largest amount of chunks as well. And I don't quite know why that's the case. I'm sure they understand that, certain amounts of objects or lights in a scene will create a lot more rendering that needs to be done. And that makes more sense that it will then tax your hardware quite a bit. But in general play Minecraft, and me running around digging dirt and going through a tunnel and just kind of feeling how that is, solid 60 FPS with my current machine. So I'm not really noticing much of a performance dip at all. It was just when I got into these like super elaborate builds that they've set up with a bunch of different light sources, and then suddenly, you know, the RTX, the ray tracing is having to figure out where the light's coming from, and it's having to simulate a lot more of that stuff. Yeah, I dropped down to 40 or in some cases like almost down to 30 frames per second. But if you consider how the Java version of the game, because by the way, this is Bedrock, this is not Java. If you consider how the Java version of the game runs with shaders, like that's a significant improvement to be able to run at 60 FPS with all the shaders and make the game look incredible. It's just, it's going to be an interesting transition when it finally comes out officially for people on Bedrock to download on PC. Because, you know, you're going to have to wait for your texture artists on Bedrock with the textures that you've either bought or downloaded for free to go through and make sure that their textures are compatible with RTX. If it's not, it's just not going to work. So if you have a favorite texture pack and that person decides not to go in and adjust for ray tracing, you're not really going to be able to utilize it to its full potential. It's not going to look super good. But the cool thing about this is with RTX, they can create far better bump mapping on textures, which means that textures can look 3D and actually have 3D components to them, because the lighting will look a lot better on those objects and not just look like a weird static-y kind of mess. So bump mapping is something that texture artists may have to go in and do as well. But like I said before, that's just going to add more and more time to waiting for RTX to finally be available for you to use, if you're even able to use it in the first place. So to wrap this up, I'm really curious what you guys have thought about the footage in the background, keeping in mind that this is the beta and things will change, and, you know, they'll probably adjust some of the contrast or some of the brightness and how that actually pans out within the game. And depending on what texture artist comes out there and what textures people will be using, you know, like how will that end up panning out? What do you guys think of RTX so far? Does it look good? Do you not really like it because it's not vanilla Minecraft? You know, I could see that being a pretty big sticking point for some people, because a lot of people like the standard version of Minecraft. I'm not necessarily one of them. I like using nice textures and stuff like that. But if you are, that's a totally valid reason to be like, look, I don't like ray tracing in Minecraft. And are you someone that can even run it? That's another thing. Do you have an RTX card? Are you even able to run this, or are you just going to have to watch people play videos or play the game and watch their videos of it in order to enjoy it like that to begin with? I'm curious how the community at whole on, you know, Minecraft on YouTube is going to take to this, because you have most people who like running a bunch of mods and therefore they're running Java. And currently, as it stands, Java does not have RTX support. Will it ever? I don't know. So does Minecraft transition over to allowing more modding available on Bedrock and then kind of open it up that way? I don't know. That's a whole different discussion for a different time, and I'm really curious to hear your guys' thoughts on all of that as well. But with all of that being said, I super like ray tracing in Minecraft. It looks really good, and I cannot wait for it to be widely available so I can actually like jump in and play with the family, because currently you can't play with other people who don't have RTX stuff, and the family does like playing on the Xbox and a computer that does not have an RTX card. So it's like I can't even play with people with this, and once the multiplayer version of it is available, which it isn't. So it's kind of poopy in some regards. But, you know, I am going to go and play it when it does come out, and I don't think I'm going to be able to play normal Minecraft until it does, because I feel so spoiled by this. And I think that should tell you enough about how I feel about it. I think it's so good that I'm not even going to touch Minecraft until this is widely available for me to be able to use while playing with other people. And with all that being said, we shall see you guys next time.